Hi, my name is Mr. Codilla, and today I'm going to show you how to draw a portrait. I'm going to start with the simple ball and plane method. You see a simple face like this. This is going to be a full frontal portrait as opposed to a three-quarter portrait. So first I'm going to start just by kind of blocking in generally. Notice how I'm holding my pencil. I'm going to block in the head using what's called the ball and plane method. So there's the ball right there. Now it's kind of, just think of it as like a sphere that starts you off with the ball and plane method. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to trim off these sides of this sphere just like that. And then I'm going to find an axis. This straight line right down the middle. That's very important when drawing a portrait that's front facing like this one. You see that axis right there. Now I'm going to do the plane. So this is the ball, and now I'm going to do the plane. The plane is just sort of like an oval that kind of comes down like this. Now what you're doing is really building a portrait. Think of it more as constructing the framework of your portrait to make sure you get everything in proper proportion. One little trick I like using is I turn my drawing upside down just to make sure I'm getting everything in proportion. People ask, why would you do that? It gives you a different perspective on your drawing, and sometimes you can see areas that you need to adjust. Remember, you're not trying to finish a portrait in just a few seconds here. There we go. Now I have the ball and the plane there. Now I'm going to start measuring off areas for my details. For example, the eyes are halfway down, the top of the eye, so I'm going to come halfway down this line, right about here. I'm going to put a line. That is not the middle line of the eye. That is where the top of the eyelid is going to sit, the top of the eye. I'll get more in detail to the eyes here in just a moment. Now I'm going to measure halfway down from the eye line to the chin, and that's going to generally be about where that ball is right there. That's going to be the bottom of the ball. That's where the end of the nose is going to be, the bottom of the nose. And then I'm going to measure about 1/3 of the way down, and that is going to be for my mouth. And again, that's about where the lips meet. Now, of course, this is a general portrait. You'll have to adjust it for the people that you're drawing, the pictures or the real people you're looking at. Now, what I want to do is start blocking in some of the measurements for the eyes. Your head is 5 eyes wide. So if you take a look at your picture and go, okay, my eye's about that wide, so it should be about 5 of these lengths wide. So your eye will fit right in there. Notice I'm not trying to get any details or anything like that right now, just trying to generally block it in. One thing I really like thinking about is when it comes to the nose, is thinking about shapes that make up the nose. The nose sort of has a sphere shape on the end here, and little planes on the side. And I think of this as more like a pyramid right on the top. And I'm just constructing the nose. Notice I'm not trying to get into any detail right now. I'm just kind of blocking in areas. I'm getting into the lips now. I think of the lips as two completely separate things. Really, lips don't look exactly like each other. They're very different from each other. So you're looking at those details. So I'm getting in some lips. Now, a lot of people would stop here and go, okay, now I'm ready to start adding details. No, you really have to spend the time building the framework. Now, think of the entire portrait, the person that you're drawing, as just building blocks, putting all those things together, planes, instead of just flat shades and lines. You want to think about the structure underneath. Although it may sound a little strange when you're blocking in your portrait, you want to think of not just skin, you want to think of the things underneath it, the muscles, the skull, so forth and so on. You want to think about those, and those will help you build your portrait. Now, you'll notice that I'm actually doing the work to start putting in some of those planes as well. I think of this plane right here you got for your chin, kind of comes down here. Now, a lot of these lines will be erased. I'm not worried about it being a little sketchy or anything like that. A little rough, it's totally fine. You want to get these planes in here and notice that there's a lot of work to do here. I'm going to come down with the neck. Generally, men have necks that come straight down from the bottom of their ear. Women's necks tend to curve in a little bit more. I'm going to drop this neck here down in just like this. And you have your shoulders that kind of come down. Now, the other thing you want to think about when you're doing this is not just building your planes and trying to get the details as fast as you can, but really think about where things are lining up. One of the biggest problems I see is people are not measuring. They're not going, okay, this is about this, this size about this size, and they're not making it the same size on the other side when it comes to a full frontal portrait. Again, turn it in upside down and you start seeing little mistakes, some little things you might need to adjust and fix on your portrait. Notice it's still very sketchy, and that's totally fine. You don't want to try to finish your portrait right from the very beginning. Take your time building it. Now, the eyes are the most important part of your portrait. It's where people are going to look the most at your portrait, so spend some time really working the eyes. Notice again, I'm not trying to finish it and add a lot of details right now. What I'm doing is just going in and adding what I need to add to build the portrait. Okay, now some of the things I want to talk about that could be easily missed are the other measurements. For example, you notice the bottom of the ear is really where the bottom of the nose is at. I may need to come over and adjust this one just a little bit there. You'll notice that the lips have a certain shape to them as well, and certain measurements too, that the end of the lips usually is where the end of the iris is, right here. It usually comes right down. So if you were to draw an imaginary line straight down from the edge of this iris, it would meet the edge of your lips right there. Now, here's a couple other little tips and tricks you might not find in other videos that I've done or other videos you've seen, is that when you're doing your mouths can be really difficult. This is a closed mouth, especially mouths that are smiling. Again, think of it as building blocks, planes, and shapes. Notice this is not a flat plane. It curves over. It curves over right here. So you got a lot of different things going on. A little other tip is a lot of people just want to curve this line. Most people will have a jawline that has some subtle curves in it, and you want to find those subtle curves. And don't forget the structure of the neck as well. A lot of people will do a great portrait and then they just forget about the structure of the neck. Now I have my portrait built. Okay, and what I mean by built is everything kind of placed in where I need to. Now I can start going back and adding detail where I need it. So I can start going in. And again, I'm not worried about shading or anything like that. Notice I haven't done a lot of sketching. I can start going in and just fine-tuning things. Like for example, I just kind of blocked in the shape of the ear real quick. Now I can start going in and really fine-tuning the shape of the ear. Again, spend this time really figuring out where things are at, how they measure, how they relate to each other. For example, if this ear is about the same size as this ear, you want to make sure before you do any shading or any detail work that everything's in the right place. One of the biggest mistakes I see is people who do an amazing job shading on their portrait. They do a great job, say for example, the details in the eyes or whatever, but basic mistakes like the ears not being aligned, the lips not being correct, so forth and so on, those things they should have taken care of at the very beginning just by blocking in, taking this time to really get their measurements correct. There. I can start even doing things like outlining the hair at this point. Now notice I'm just keeping it sketchy, just keeping it a little loose and built. Okay, and what I mean by built is everything kind of placed in where I need to. Now I can start going back and adding detail where I need it. So I can start going in. And again, I'm not worried about shading or anything like that. Notice I haven't done a lot of sketching. I can start going in and just fine-tuning things. Like for example, I just kind of blocked in the shape of the ear real quick. Now I can start going in and really fine-tuning the shape of the ear. Again, spend this time really figuring out where things are at, how they measure, how they relate to each other. For example, if this ear is about the same size as this ear, you want to make sure before you do any shading or any detail work that everything's in the right place. One of the biggest mistakes I see is people who do an amazing job shading on their portrait. They do a great job, say for example the details in the eyes or whatever, but basic mistakes like the ears not being aligned, the lips not being correct, so forth and so on, those things they should have taken care of at the very beginning just by blocking in, taking this time to really get their measurements correct. There. I can start even doing things like outlining the hair at this point. Now notice I'm just keeping it sketchy, just keeping it a little loose and kind of rough. Now you'll notice I'm just keeping it loose, keeping it Now you'll notice I'm still keeping it loose. I'm keeping this sketch very rough because I want to give myself the freedom of really changing it as I need to. One of the other big mistakes I see people make is sometimes they start adding a lot of shading and then they find a mistake, but they've already committed to all that shading, all that detail work, and so they have this struggle like, do I erase all that hard work that I did just to fix that simple basic mistake that I had in the very beginning? So again, that's why you really need to spend this time really building that structure of your portrait. Now you'll notice I start adding just a little bit of shading just to kind of help me start to find things. I'm going to keep this sketch just a little bit more on the rough side for the sake of this video. But now you'll notice I start using my eraser. Let's go in and I'll start erasing some of these lines that kind of helped guide me in getting the proper structure. I don't want to erase them completely sometimes because they will allow me to do some more shading later. They'll kind of help me to find things. Now you'll notice as I was sketching and starting to shade, I was using some of those lines that I originally blocked in to kind of show me the direction I needed to shade. For example, right here, I needed to shade this shadow coming around the edge, going around the skull, around the forehead. I think of this area of the skull right here that kind of comes around for your forehead, and so I want to shade around that. That kind of gives me a much more three-dimensional looking portrait here. You notice I was doing the hair. I was just kind of keeping it simple here. I just kind of block it in. Hair can be very tricky and, of course, very different from one person to the next. So you really have to pay very close attention to what you're drawing, especially when it comes to something like the hair, which doesn't fit nice and neatly into the ball and plane method. The ball and plane method is great for a beginning, but then obviously once you start your details, you want to start adjusting things for the particular portrait you're doing.